Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the potential Brexit game theorising going on. And when trying to work out what might happen, it often seems futile trying to think of what realistically can be done. What matters in politics is what the main players believe they can do. They are not always right, and with the current players, they are frequently badly wrong. But first, if you find yourself enjoying this video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So at the moment, there's a lot of news coming out that conservatives, senior conservatives, are increasingly thinking that the reality is that at the end of this month, there's either going to be a Brexit deal or a delay, not a no deal. But the deal is impossible for two main reasons. First of all is that Boris Johnson is not permitted to bring the current withdrawal agreement up for a vote because it has already been rejected by Parliament. And there needs to be a new session for him to bring it back again. Now, of course, he could get it changed. That's what he says he's going to do. But the thing is, he's running out of time. In fact, he's basically run out of time. If he had a realistic proposal for the backstop, then he'd have already announced what it is. Apparently, he's going to announce it later today. I shall not bother waiting with bated breath. So the withdrawal agreement isn't really going to change. Can't bring it forward. But let's say he tweaked it enough that he could bring it forward. So the second problem is this. If Parliament votes for a deal, different deal in this case, but then Boris Johnson fails to lay the further obligations legislation before the House, then he is no longer bound by the Benn Act to sign the extension letter, and he can take us out of the EU without a deal. So this is because voting for a deal is not the end of the process, which may surprise some people. But MPs know this, or at least if they don't, they'll be told if they've been asleep all this time, and they'll understand that voting for a deal at the moment is actually voting for no deal. If they vote for a deal without the extension, they're voting for no deal. They know that. So there is no chance that Boris Johnson can get a deal passed this month. I mean, it's doubtful he could anyway. At the end of the day, it wasn't being passed before. Why would it this time? Ironically, even if he were genuine about getting a deal through, nobody would believe it and trust him to carry it out. They would literally be tearing up the Benn Act on an act of blind faith and trust in Boris Johnson. This is not going to happen. So delay it is then, assuming that they really don't think there's a no deal. But interestingly, it has been reported that Dominic Cummings has been briefing pro-Brexit Conservative MPs that the last weeks of October will be spent in the courts. Now, if true, and this is just a report, this will be an indication that they are expecting to pull every trick they can in order to run down the clock. And we're not talking about legal tricks here, of course. An obvious interpretation of this is that Boris Johnson will not be signing that letter on October the 19th. They may even try to prorogue Parliament again. Yes, replacing him as Prime Minister is an easy way to prevent it, but it's not as easy as it should be. The Liberal Democrats and Conservative rebels will not support Corbyn as a replacement Prime Minister. And Jeremy Corbyn will not support anyone that's not called Jeremy Corbyn. If it literally came down to supporting Corbyn and allowing no deal, then it may be that both the Lib Dems and those Conservative rebels would swing behind him for the few weeks necessary to get that extension and then trigger a general election. But this is presumably the game of chicken that Jeremy Corbyn is playing. He's also the party leader most open to a no-deal Brexit, not that I'm saying he actively wants it, and so would see it as the least to lose by being blamed for the consequences. And there will be blame all round. Sure, if we leave without a deal, it will be principally Boris Johnson who is responsible. But everyone knows that it could have been stopped, and easily, if he were replaced as Prime Minister. Corbyn would be blamed because he didn't get behind a compromise candidate. But the Lib Dems and Tory rebels would be blamed because they could have just opted for Corbyn to get the extension. The other opposition MPs, including the SNP, would avoid blame because, well, they've said they'll support anyone who commits to getting the extension. They've not shown any signs that they give a crap who that is at all. But if anyone is prepared to blink on this matter, it will not happen until the last moment. The current situation is that Boris Johnson is legally required to sign the letter requesting an extension. It's possible that the legal solution, along with any remedy from the Scottish Court of Session, which may now deliver a decision as early as next Monday, it's been pushed ahead, solves the problem, and there's no need to oust Boris Johnson before a general election. So until a legal solution fails, there is no impetus for this game of chicken to end. Nobody has to blink just yet. The problem is that there are a few internal thoughts that we don't know about. So from Boris Johnson's point of view, will he actually risk refusing to comply with the Benn Act? It's one thing to talk tough in the small number of interviews he's giving, but quite another when faced with the prospect of a criminal record and prison. One of the things that's been tested in the courts at the moment is, can Boris Johnson be jailed if he refuses to sign this letter on October the 19th? Would he just sign it and blame the Remainers in Parliament as he gets ready for the general election? Or does he think he can refuse, and although he knows the courts will find against him, but maybe he doesn't think they'll charge him with misconduct in public office and send him to prison? Does he also think he's impervious to a no confidence vote? It's quite clear there's no consensus for a replacement amongst the opposition at the moment. If there were, they'd have already done it. It's also clear that they cannot allow a general election to be triggered without the extension. Boris Johnson knows that Corbyn will not issue a vote until all have agreed Johnson's replacement, and at the moment, that ain't happening. Does Boris Johnson believe they'll never agree, even when faced with no deal? In which case, he'll feel secure as Prime Minister. The only constitutional stumbling block for him in these circumstances would be the Queen dismissing him and appointing Corbyn without an approach from Parliament. But as I discussed before, I can't see this happening. People have pointed out the 1975 case with the Australian Prime Minister, but that didn't go down very well, and I doubt Queen Elizabeth wants to repeat the experience in her own country. But there are also thoughts of Jeremy Corbyn that I'm not sure about. Now, we know he wants Brexit. I'm happy to believe he doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, and I'm quite sure he doesn't want to be blamed for one. But consider the situation. So let's say we crash out of the EU with a deal on October the 31st, because Boris Johnson defied the will of Parliament and the courts. A general election is triggered, but it can't take place until December by this time. By the time the general election comes around, the full effects of Yellowhammer have come to pass. Chaos in trade, food and medicine shortages. It's coming up to Christmas and millions don't have enough to eat, much less looking forward to the seasonal feast. Might not the electorate give the Conservatives a kick up the arse so hard that they'll still be feeling it in 100 years? Would Corbyn accept the harm that this would cause to many millions of the most vulnerable in our society for political gain? Does he believe that he could form a majority government in such circumstances? Wouldn't this be incredibly tempting for someone who at the moment is not doing well enough in the polls to form a majority? Even if we accept that he genuinely doesn't want no deal, he'd get to become Prime Minister. He has his precious Brexit because Boris Johnson's delivered it, and then he gets to work on sorting out the Tory mess by negotiating deals with the EU, looking like the hero, or so he may imagine. But of course, he'd have to make sure that the blame didn't stick to him. After all, he could have backed the compromise candidate and stopped it all. But is that how the majority of voters would see it? More importantly, what does Corbyn think that the voters will see? A Labour leader who tried to stop Johnson valiantly but didn't quite have enough support in Parliament to oust him? Or a reckless egomaniac who refused to do what was necessary to stop it when the option was available to him? Could he blame the Lib Dems for refusing to support him, even though their support wouldn't have swung it anyway, and bring back voters to Labour? And then there's the thinking of the counter situation. So let's say Corbyn does act to stop no deal, however that is. Then there are millions of Brexit supporters out there who will still not understand the consequences of a no-deal Brexit because he'll have stopped it. They may blame Corbyn for stealing their prize. He knows he's pissed off a large chunk of the committed Remain vote. Now he may feel he'll be pissing off a lot of the Leave vote as well. So considering all that, Jeremy Corbyn may feel that a Tory Brexit, even a no-deal Brexit, is political gold for him. And in all this, it makes no difference what we individually think. It doesn't even matter what the voting public think. It's what Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn think, how they imagine the consequences to go in their own personal game theorising will determine the courses of action that they take. And as I said at the start, they may be right or they may be wrong. So although I'm fairly clear that a deal is not feasible this month, whether we get a delay or not, whether we go out with no deal, may depend on what Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn are prepared to do for their political aims and how they think the events will pan out after certain actions. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.